Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro, everyone. And today we are going to be speaking about the correct way to make a professional introduction. Before I get started, I'm really sorry about that background noise. There's some construction work going on around here, and I apologize ahead of time. I couldn't find a different location before we did this. Anyway, so today we are going to be talking about the correct way to make a professional introduction. And the reason that we are talking about this today is because I have been receiving a bunch of emails from people who have wanted to introduce me to people and are not going about the correct way of doing that. I've also received some complaints from other people about the fact that people aren't quite skilled up on how to do this. And yes, it's a skill, and this podcast exists to help you learn how to do these skills that you would have otherwise learned if you were in perhaps a corporate job. So why would you want to introduce people professionally? Why does it matter whether you introduce them as, hey, person A, meet person B, that's it? Well, the reason that it's important to know how to introduce people is because there's a lot of credibility that goes in who is introducing two people to each other. And there's a lot of credibility that goes into the way that the introduction is made. You want to make sure that people have the information about why they're being introduced to each other. And you also want to be sure that you're not giving away people's contact information without their permission. Doing a formalized introduction allows everybody to have the information that they want and for them to be prompted as to why they're being introduced to somebody in the first place. Some important things to remember when you're making a professional introduction between two or more people is to choose your platform properly. Some people, it's okay to introduce via text. Others, it's more appropriate to formalize it even more by introducing them on email. Social media is a really great way to introduce people. And other ways are on the phone, on a teleconference. And of course, there's the other way, in person. But today we're primarily going to be talking about how to introduce to people who are not in front of each other and not in person. And I'm going to read from an example of where I was introduced to somebody. I'm going to blur out the names, well, not mention the names, but just to give you an example of how it was done. And it's a pretty standard way of doing things. But before we do get started as well, I want you to really bear in mind the respect you need to pay to people's privacy. So before you introduce two people, be sure to make sure that the people who are being introduced are okay with you introducing them to each other. And this cannot be understated enough. The amount of times I've got pissed off as fuck because somebody who has my contact details has just gone and introduced me to somebody that I really didn't want to be introduced to. So before you go ahead and make an introduction, let's say that somebody comes to you and says, hey, I know you know this person. Could you organize an introduction? The response to that is, sure, let me check in with them first. You go ahead, you speak to person B and tell them, hey, person A would like an introduction. Is it okay if I introduce you? And what's the best mechanism to do that? Should I do it via email? Or should I do that via text? Or is social media the better way to go about it? There are some people who I don't want to have my email address. I don't want to have my phone number. So I'll go ahead and say to someone, go ahead and introduce them to me via email. The kinds of people I don't want having my email address are salespeople or people who are going to put me on email lists. They're people I don't want to have that kind of contact information. If they do want to contact me, they can hit me up via social media. If they get too spammy, I can just block them or any of the businesses that they represent that are spamming me. So we have that side of things. If somebody comes back to you and says, no, I don't want an introduction, then you have to respectfully go back to person A and say, listen, it hasn't worked out. They've asked me not to make an introduction. And that's perfectly okay and perfectly professional. If person A is a professional, they'll appreciate the fact that you checked with person B before you made the introduction. It speaks volumes about you as a consummate professional. Okay. So when it comes to making the introduction, how do you structure that? There absolutely is a way to structure that email or that message that you should learn how to follow, and you should follow every time you're making the introduction. So the subject of the email should, first of all, no blind copying. Blind copying is rude. If you're making an introduction between two people, make sure it's just those two people. Again, that lends itself back to the respect of people's privacy. The next thing, the subject of the email should say introduction between, and then put the names of the people. You can just write introduction, but it just makes it more formal to have introduction between X and Y, or A and B. We'll keep it in the terms of A and B. Right. Then what you want to be doing is addressing the email or the text to both parties. And how you want to start it is, hello A and B. I'm going to read off this email so hello A and B, I'd like to introduce the two of you here. Now bear in mind this, because you have reached out to both parties and they know this is going to happen, because they're expecting this email, they'll be primed to take action and won't be surprised when they receive this. Once you've said, I'd like to introduce the two of you here, the first paragraph is addressed to one person and the second paragraph is addressed to the second person. So paragraph A, the first paragraph, let's address it to person A. You say, A, I'd like you to meet person B from this company, and like all the companies that they represent. I'm reading off this one. I own two companies. This person's introducing me. So it's dear such and such. I'd like you to meet my associate, Lee. She owns Elixir Specialty Coffee and Map It Forward, both of which are unique in the coffee world. Then you go on and you say a little bit about person B, and you state some really nice things about them. But true things. Just say why you believe this person is worthy of meeting. Okay? That will help the person understand a little bit of context when you're making the introduction. Then what you want to do is state the reason that person B wants to be introduced to you. Okay, so in this case, Lee is interested in having you on her podcast as a guest to talk about XYZ. Okay, this is someone introducing me to somebody that they knew, that I had approached them and said, would you mind making an introduction? All right, next is the second paragraph where person B is being introduced to person A, and you follow the same format. Lee, I'd like you to meet person A, who is from this company. Say some nice things, put it in context, and then relay it back to the reason for the introduction. And here it says, I'm sure due to person A's entrepreneurial vision and leadership, they'd make a great guest on your podcast. Then the last statement is, I'll leave it to the two of you to discuss, and I hope you find a way to work together for a mutual benefit in the future. Okay, so you end it with what you expect the two to happen from here. So so that the two people know which way things will progress from there. The response to that should come back with one of the two. Usually the person who requested the introduction will be the first to respond, and they will say something like, "Hey, person C," that's the person that's making the introduction, "I appreciate you making the introduction." Then back to person A. "Hey, person A, it's really great to meet you. I really want to have you on my podcast." So you talk about the reason, you talk about why it would benefit you, and then you leave it in their court. And it's their choice after that whether they reach out to you or not. Now, if they don't reach out to you within, let's say, a week, then it's appropriate for you to go back, not copying the person who introduced you, but going back and saying, "Hey, person A, I just wanted to touch base and check in that you received my last email. If you do have a moment to talk, I'd love to schedule some time so that we can discuss the opportunity of you coming on my podcast." Now, if you receive no response after that, it is inappropriate to pursue the matter further. That's them clearly signaling you that the introduction is something that they no longer wanted to pursue. And it is professional then for you to just drop the matter and move on. The number of times that I have seen people who aren't quite versed in this try and push and push and push, and it's like, dude, take a fucking hint. I've decided I don't want to talk to you. I've decided that this isn't something that I want to pursue. So being professional by not pursuing an unrequited connection is a part of your growth and a mark of your professionalism in that situation. So I hope this has helped. It's really important for us as an industry to start getting really great at this. It's something that's going to help us move and elevate the way that we approach each other and the way that we build deeper, better connections with each other. So, one thing before I go. If you are somebody who has been listening to the Map It Forward podcast, which is the big brother podcast to the Daily Coffee Pro, you will know that we talk a lot about the sea market. We are trying to unravel a lot about what's going on with the supply chain. And you'll know that we spoke last year with a bunch of different people about the sea market crashing. This week, the sea market crashed even lower than what it crashed last year. It went to 92 this week, and today it's at 94. We don't know what's going to happen, if it's going to go even further down. The reason I mention this is because we have to get better at paying attention to these things and understanding the ramifications for our industry and the supply chain if this doesn't get any better, and understanding the role that we play as coffee professionals in influencing that is going to be important. Direct relationship buying is going to be a long-term solution to fixing this. We're going to talk more about it on the podcast tomorrow. So if this is something that interests you, please tune in tomorrow. We're going to deep dive into this for 10 minutes, for what you can for 10 minutes. If you are interested in listening to some podcasts before we have that discussion tomorrow, check out my conversation with Ollie from Ollie Brown, or with the Vizcaíno brothers from Two Birds Coffee or Finca Esperanza. Mookie Young, we had that conversation just a couple of weeks ago. There's a bunch of people you should talk to. Mark Dundon, actually, I would probably say start with the conversation with Mark Dundon. And there's a lot to understand around this subject, and it's not pretty right now. But we don't necessarily talk about the pretty things on this podcast. We talk about the things that need to be talked about. And as always, thank you for your support. Please rate or subscribe or share or comment or do any of those amazing things that tell us that you're enjoying this podcast. Peace, love, and peanut butter, everyone. Speak to you tomorrow.